This is the third part of my conversation with Will Spence and Olivia Milburn about Yao Emei's The Unfilial. And here you can hear their recommendations on similar and related texts. Please do let us know in the comments if you've read any of these or if you have any further recommendations of your own. Welcome to the third and final part of my discussion with Olivia Milburn and Will Spence on Yao Emei's The Unfilial, and we'll hear their recommendations for similar or related books in just a moment. If you haven't watched or listened to part 1 or 2, I strongly suggest that you do that first. Okay, so who would like to go first? Anybody dying to give their recommendations?
Okay, so I'll go first then and recommend Taipei Ren by Xianyong, Taipei People. So I'm recommending this as a kind of related book. It's structured as a whole set of short stories. And Bai Xianyong is writing about refugees from mainland China arriving in Taiwan after 1949 and their stories as residents of Taipei, and how they are still so profoundly marked by the enormous upheavals they have been through, the Civil War, and before that, the Second World War. And the themes that you see in Yao Emei's work of trauma and the way that the characters are kind of psychologically bent out of shape by their experiences. On the surface they may seem perfectly nice and normal people. You don't have to scrape very far before you realize that some of these people are really disturbed. And the life that they grew up with is just gone.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, I just read that recently. I didn't know you were going to mention it, but the bitterness kind of comes through in these petty ways of, I mean, it's reminiscent of Eileen Chang, I think, as well, in that people are obsessed just with the material, keeping up with the Joneses almost, whereas this huge trauma in the background, they're bothered about what they're wearing, it's all this kind of thing.
Yeah, yes, that the way that Bai Xianyong is a truly wonderful writer, and the way that he conveys these characters and the way that he presents them as new Taiwanese, but still so very, very marked by their past. That's really wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. Will, do you have anything you'd like to suggest?
I do. I have two actually. So firstly, I think just Yiyun's work in general, but especially her short story collection, 1,000 Years of Good Prayers, which I would recommend to anyone, whether they were interested in China or not. And I think it bears similarities to The Unfilial, in terms of its tone and the kind of reserved, kind of slightly melancholic tone. Its first-person narrators, but especially the worlds that it depicts, where happiness is always very fleeting and people have to learn how to come to terms with the past. And it's just a really beautiful collection of stories. And secondly, I would like to recommend Cockfight by an Ecuadorian writer called Maria Fernanda Ampuero, and translated by Francis Riddle. I certainly wouldn't describe it as beautiful or reserved in any way, but it's certainly very powerful in the way that it kind of depicts the darker side of domestic life in Latin America, again told from a kind of female perspective. And it's a while ago since I read it. I read it a while ago, but I think it would be an interesting collection to read alongside the Unfilial, because you would note, I think, certain cross-cultural similarities, but also some kinds of differences as well. So you have, like, in the Latin American context, religion plays an important role in a way that it doesn't so much, or maybe even not at all, in the Unfilial. Yeah, neither of those is very kind of light reading, but then I suppose the Unfilial isn't either, really, but they're both very good.
Great, thank you. And yeah, going to Latin America from China is very much in the spirit of the World Literature Podcast. So thanks for that suggestion. Any others at all? Olivia, you got anything else? You happy with Taipei people?
Okay, so my second suggestion would be Yixin, Jai, which was translated as Educated Youth. And Yixin, he's written a whole series of books. This is the only one I think that's been translated into English. And he very much talks autobiographically about his experience being sent from Shanghai during the Cultural Revolution to Yunnan province. So yeah, being sent to the border with Myanmar, and then spending 10 years there, and then he goes back to Shanghai and lives through the revolution of what's happened to Shanghai in the last sort of 40 years, really, and talks about the changes that this has made, but also the way that experience of spending 10 years in Yunnan really has marked him and his companions and their children and their grandchildren. That it doesn't, that experience just doesn't go away. The break in your life that represents is going to be something that you see for generations to come.
Interesting. I was just thinking about how, Yunnan, particularly around Dali, beautiful cities, now a sort of destination for young Chinese who want to get out of the rat race and kind of voluntarily
destination, absolutely.
Yeah,
all of these people moving out of Beijing and Shanghai and these other big cities to go and live in Yunnan. And then, at the time that, 50 years ago, this is like the poorest, most backward, most remote place pretty much that they could have found to send these people to. And it's not necessarily a negative experience 100% having gone to Yunnan, but it is something that has a knock-on impact. And it still affects the children and the grandchildren.
So generational, if not trauma, at least sort of repeating patterns of
just kind of, leaving your family and being wrenched from that, and then the lack of connection with your family when you come back. Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for those recommendations. And yeah, thank you both for a great discussion. And I hope it's inspired people to read The Unfilial, which is coming out on 28th of September. So be ready to grab your copy. Thanks once again, Will. Thanks once again to Olivia. It's been great to have you on the World Literature Podcast.
Thanks, Ivan.